In 1970, Oldsmobile did something a bit unexpected. They made a muscle car that looked wild, sounded tough, and had stripes, spoilers, and even body-colored bumpers. But under all that flash, it had a small block engine. Not a big one like most muscle cars. The car was called the Oldsmobile Rally 350, and it was built to fight rising insurance costs without losing the muscle car look. It only lasted for 1 year, and today it's one of the rarest Oldsmobiles ever made. The Oldsmobile Rally 350 was built in Lansing, Michigan. It was not its own separate model, but rather a special W45 option package on the Cutlass S Cutlass Hardtop or the base F85 Club Coupe. Oldsmobile wanted to create a car that looked like the high-performance 442 W30, but used a smaller, more affordable engine. The whole idea was to attract younger buyers who could not afford the insurance on big block cars like the 425 Rocket V8 or the 455 V8. At the center of the Rally 350 was the L74 Rocket 350 engine. It was a 350 cubic inch small block V8 with a single Rochester Quadrajet 4-barrel carburetor. It made 310 horsepower at 4,800 revolutions per minute and 390 pound-feet of torque at 3,200 revolutions per minute. It had a 10.25:1 compression ratio, which meant it needed premium fuel. Buyers could pick from a 3-speed manual, a 4-speed Muncie manual, or a turbo-hydromatic 3-speed automatic. The rear axle ratio was 3.23:1, but 3.42 and 3.91 were also available. This setup gave it a 0 to 60 miles per hour time of around 7 seconds, with a quarter-mile time close to 15.3 seconds at about 94.5 miles per hour. But what really made the Rally 350 stand out was how it looked. The whole car was painted in Sebring yellow, including the front and rear urethane bumpers. It had black and orange side stripes, a fiberglass hood with twin scoops, a rear deck spoiler, and Superstock 214 by 7-inch wheels wrapped in G7014 bias-belted tires. The package also included the FE2 Rally Sport suspension with front and rear stabilizers. Drum brakes were standard, but front disc brakes were an option. Only 3,547 Rally 350 cars were made in total. Of these, about 2,367 were Cutlass S Holiday Coupes, around 1,020 were F85 Club Coupes, and the rest were Cutlass hardtops. Even though it looked aggressive, many dealers had trouble selling them. The car sat on lots, and after 1970, the Rally 350 disappeared. It never came back. Today, the Rally 350 is a rare sight. Its design borrowed pieces from more famous models, but its purpose was different. It tried to be a muscle car for the real world, one that looked fast but was a little easier to live with. Not everyone wanted it back then, but that only made it more special now. In the middle of the 1960s, while most American cars were getting longer and heavier, one car decided to throw tradition out the window. It had no rear-wheel drive, it had no long drive shaft tunnel, and its speedometer looked like it came from a slot machine. The 1966 Oldsmobile Toronado was a car that confused people at first glance. Was it a luxury car? A muscle car? A science experiment? Whatever it was, it had a 425 Super Rocket V8 engine under the hood and a front-wheel drive layout that made it one of the strangest and boldest cars General Motors had built in years. Oldsmobile, a division of General Motors, launched the Toronado on October 7, 1965. It was the first American front-wheel drive car since the Cord 812, back in the 1930s. The man behind its sharp design was David North, who had originally created it as a styling exercise for a smaller car. General Motors liked it so much they decided to build it, only much larger. The Toronado sat on the E-body platform, which it shared with the Buick Riviera and later the Cadillac Eldorado. But only the Toronado got the new front-wheel drive setup. known as the unitized power package. The 425 cubic inch Super Rocket V8 made 385 horsepower at 4,800 revolutions per minute and 475 pound-feet of torque at 3,200 revolutions per minute. It used a Rochester 4GC 4-barrel carburetor and a 10.5:1 compression ratio. That much power needed a strong transmission, so Oldsmobile created the THHM 425, a 3-speed automatic made just for the front-wheel drive system. The layout was heavy at the front, with a 60/40ths weight balance, but it allowed for a flat cabin floor, which meant more room for passengers. The drivetrain was so tough that General Motors later used it in front-wheel drive motorhomes with barely any changes. The suspension up front used double wishbones with torsion bars, and the rear had a beam axle on a single-leaf spring. The braking system used 11-inch finned drum brakes on all 4 wheels. Disc brakes became available in later models. The Toronado was 211 inches long, 78.5 inches wide, and had a wheelbase of 119 inches. It weighed between 4,311 and 4,500 pounds and could hit 60 miles per hour in about 8 to 9 seconds. It topped out around 130 miles per hour. Inside, it had a strange-looking drum-style speedometer where the numbers rolled like a slot machine. There were optional bucket seats or a strato bench, power windows, power locks, and even a tilt telescopic steering wheel. Some of the luxury models came with air conditioning and an AM radio. Oldsmobile produced 40,963 Toronados for 1966. Though sales dropped in 1967, the Toronado left a mark. The platform helped build the wild Jetway 707 six-wheeled limousine, and the styling became famous for its hidden headlights and fastback shape. It was not just a car, it was a front-wheel drive muscle cruiser that dared to be different. In the early 1970s, muscle cars were slowly losing their fight. Emission rules were tightening, insurance costs were rising, and fuel was no longer cheap. But in the middle of all that, General Motors quietly built something strange. A muscle car that looked like a truck, wore a GMC badge, and carried one of the biggest engines they had. It was called the 1972 GMC Sprint SP454. And most people still do not know it existed. The GMC Sprint was introduced in 1971 as a response to the Chevrolet El Camino. Both were based on the Chevrolet Chevelle, but the Sprint wore a GMC badge and had a different front grille. Underneath, though, it was the same A-body platform, but GMC decided it wanted its own muscle version. So they created the Sprint SP, using regular production option YE7. This was GMC's answer to Chevrolet's SS package. It gave the truck car a performance look and some serious upgrades. The 1972 GMC Sprint SP came with a few different engine choices, but the top of the food chain was the LS5454 cubic inch V8. This engine produced 270 horsepower at 4,000 revolutions per minute and about 390 pound-feet of torque at 3,200 revolutions per minute. It used an 8.5:1 compression ratio and had a Rochester Quadrajet 4-barrel carburetor. The engine was paired with the Turbo Hydromatic 400 3-speed automatic transmission. All Sprint SP454 models came with the 12-bolt rear axle and a limited slip differential. Only around 749 Sprint SP units were built in 1972. Out of those, about 114 had the LS5454 engine, which makes them extremely rare. These were not just Chevrolets with a different badge. GMC gave them their own identity in the brochures and dealership floors. Still, they never got the same attention the El Camino SS got. Most Sprint SP454 models came with rally wheels, SS gauges with a tachometer and a clock, power steering, power brakes, and dual exhaust. Many surviving examples today have been modified. Some include Edelbrock intake manifolds, Flowmaster dual exhaust systems, upgraded sway bars, boxed control arms, QA1 upper suspension arms, and sometimes a turbo 350 transmission swap. These upgrades help with both power delivery and drivability. One factory Sprint SP454 was documented and sold in Canada for around 28,000 Canadian dollars in 2019. It had matching numbers, a W code showing the 454 engine, and original documents like the Protecto plate and build sheet. Because GMC produced fewer vehicles than Chevrolet, finding a true unmodified Sprint SP454 today is difficult. Most collectors focus on the El Camino, and the Sprint is often forgotten. The 1972 GMC Sprint SP454 may have looked like a parts hauler, but it had the heart of a big block bruiser. It lived in the shadows of more famous names, but it still managed to punch above its weight. Or at least tow it. In 1964, Ford did something that made drag racers stop and stare. It was not just another Fairlane with a big engine. It was something leaner, louder, and clearly built with one purpose: to get down the quarter mile before the other guy even knew what happened. It was called the Ford Fairlane Thunderbolt, and it did not roll off the line like your average car. It was born in a workshop, stuffed with raw horsepower, and stripped of everything that did not help it go fast. It was so focused that it even skipped sun visors. The 1964 Ford Fairlane Thunderbolt started as a mid-size Fairlane 500 two-door post sedan, but instead of being built entirely at Ford's factory, it was shipped as a bare shell to Dearborn Steel Tubing Company, also known as DST. Ford wanted something legal for NHRA Superstock racing, so they needed at least 100 units. That meant 100 cars had to be produced, fast. Out of those, 49 were manual transmission and 51 were automatic. They made just enough to meet the rules. The Thunderbolt had a 427 cubic-inch V8 engine under its teardrop-shaped fiberglass hood. This was the Ford FE engine, already well known in NASCAR and other racing scenes. It had dual Holley 4-barrel carburetors sitting on top, fed by a ram air system that actually went through the headlight opening. Ford said it made 425 horsepower at 6,000 revolutions per minute and 480 pound-feet of torque, but most people believe it made much more, closer to 540 horsepower in reality. Some of these cars ran the quarter mile in 11.6 seconds at 124 miles per hour, which in 1964 was downright wild. To make the Thunderbolt as light as possible, Ford got creative. They replaced the front fenders, hood, and doors with fiberglass panels. The front and rear bumpers were made of aluminum, and the windows were plexiglass, not real glass. Inside, there were no armrests, no radio, no heater, and no carpet. The front seats were pulled from a Ford Econoline van because they were smaller and lighter. Even the battery was moved to the trunk to help with weight balance during launches. The Thunderbolt made its racing debut at the 1964 Winter Nationals, where Gas Ronda drove it to a big win in Superstock. Later that year, Ford won the NHRA Superstock Championship, thanks in part to drivers like Phil Bonner, also known as Daddy Warbucks. Bonner's Thunderbolt, car number 53, became one of the most famous of them all, although he crashed the first one and had to get a replacement. The first 11 Thunderbolts were painted vintage burgundy, but the rest came in Wimbledon white. They all had a warning plate in the glove box saying the panels might not fit right. That was Ford's way of saying, "This is a race car, not a show car." Each one cost about $3,780, which was a lot for a Fairlane, but cheap for a turnkey drag car. Ford only made these for 1 year. NHRA changed the rules and raised the production minimum to 500 cars, which shut the Thunderbolt project down. But in that short time, the car had made a name for itself. It was not a showpiece. It was a factory-built rocket, stripped to the bones and sent straight to the track. and for many racers in 1964, the only thing more frightening than racing a Thunderbolt was lining up against one.